Welcome to Exploring the BioEdge. Here we discuss a
video featuring the snow leopard hunting the red sheep in a part of northwestern India called Ladakh. Many of you have probably seen this video before, but we're going to try and walk you through some of the more intimate and exciting aspects, giving you a deep biological insight into what happens and explaining the setting, which is even more spectacular than it first comes over. Ladakh is part of the western Himalayan range. It's high, dry, barren, but it has enough prey to sustain one of the most specialized felid predators on Earth, the snow leopard, in very challenging circumstances. And here we see the snow leopard hunting for its life, stalking a small herd of the red sheep, and then engaging in a very interesting maneuver or strategy, not simply just pouncing on its prey, but coming at it from above hill in full view and forcing one of the unfortunate members of the prey species into a parkour course, which eventually leads to catastrophe for the poor prey animal and triumph for the predator.
And yes, a wonderful video, and particularly relevant for me because it's a good friend of mine who took the video, John Rousseau, who leads the company Apex Expeditions, and he described in great detail to me how this video was taken. It was after 5-6 days of searching for the snow leopard, and they didn't even see a glimpse of a tail over that time. And it was their final morning, having coffee in a somewhat despondent mood for the group. He was leading a tour there. And they spotted this snow leopard about 1 kilometer away, if not more, through a scope. And John had the amazing intuition that the snow leopard was going to walk towards the group and then go on a hunt right in front of them. And he predicted the outcome of that hunt an hour or two before it happened, which is just astounding. So you're going to tell us a bit more about the tactics of that leopard and how it's an unusual video in that it's not patched together from many different days and different sightings.
Yes, well, for me, that's the most one of the most significant things about the video. I mean, I'm as much into drama and action and nature is red in tooth and claw as anyone else. But I've been jaded somewhat over the years in watching so many BBC or Attenborough and otherwise fine documentaries insult our intelligence in a way by kind of stitching together disparate sequences into a kind of a narrative that pretends that they witnessed a whole chase, where in fact they just cobble together various bits of footage to try and string together the narrative in a storyline. Well, in this case, it's the real thing, because the entire narrative was actually filmed in sequence, and the only interruptions are where the snow leopard goes behind the topography. It descends out of sight behind a ridge and then comes over. So it'll be a bit disjointed in that way, but you're actually watching a single individual on a single occasion within a single 20-minute period or half-hour period doing its thing. And I'm not sure that's ever been done before in a complex hunt by a felid carnivore anywhere on Earth in documentary land, where they watched the whole thing like that. It couldn't be done where you could keep your eyes on the animal for the entire time, because it's a very mountainous place, and this animal had to walk up and down slopes several times to get above its prey. So that to me is really exciting, because you're watching the real thing. You're actually watching a real hunt, and that gives it an authenticity which is very important to a biologically minded person or a naturalist. But I would say that there's two outstanding things that we witness in this particular hunt that are kind of not in the public consciousness about how big cats hunt, because everybody knows that big cats hunt essentially by stealth. They hide and then they pounce. which is one of the reasons why the snow leopard is so superbly camouflaged, even better camouflaged than most big cats, if that's believable. But what we see here is two additional things. Firstly, this snow leopard does not attempt to come around the hill at the level of its prey. Instead, it emerges above them in full view. I'm not sure of the exact distance, but it must be at least 50 meters above them when it charges out into the open. Which
and it started below them. I know John told me that.
When it was still some way distant in the topography.
Yeah, it spent about an hour, I think, climbing up above them. That was when you see it sneaking behind the boulders. That was all going uphill to get that position above them. It started from below.
Yeah, so that seems to indicate a deliberate bid on the part of the snow leopard to get the height advantage. So one asks, well, why does it need a height advantage? Because theoretically, there's no gravitational advantage. They're both running downhill, and they should both enjoy the acceleration benefits of that. But what this amounts to is that the snow leopard wasn't so much trying to surprise the red sheep. It did surprise them to some degree, but it was far enough when it emerged in the open that they should have been able to outdistance it if it was just a contest of speed and acceleration. But by positioning itself above the prey, what the snow leopards succeeded in doing is designing a contest of what we can, in human analogy terms, a parkour course. And as we know, a parkour course is a course of obstacles, not just distance, in which the animal that has the greater fluidity, stability, and ability to negotiate obstacles without crashing and burning has the advantage. And this is exactly what happens, because initially the sheep run downhill at about the same speed as the leopard. It's not really gaining on them. At the end of the chase, there was still tens of meters distance between the unfortunate victim and the cat. But because the sheep proved to be less adept at parkour than the cat prevailed. Why is the sheep less adept at parkour? It's because an ungulate, such as a sheep, which has hooves, has a tremendous advantage in terms of locomotory efficiency, which translates to walking efficiency and speed efficiency, but it has a disadvantage in terms of stability. The cat has broad paws and less elongated feet, but it has a tremendous advantage in stability. It can stop itself from coming to grief on a stony and unstable slope, and eventually, when it jumps down the cliff that spelt the end of its prey, it does so unharmed. It also has a much longer tail. The red sheep has a negligible tail. The snow leopard has one of the longest tails of any predator, and that tail, to some extent, acts as a balancing tool in a way that's not very well understood. But the crunch comes where the sheep is panicking and running downhill, and it finds itself with no alternative but to jump down a cliff onto a fairly flat place, and it's just too high. The sheep just does not have the ability to shock absorb, and so it lands up on its back, probably mortally wounded. Whereas the cat does the same leap a few seconds later, and does so unscathed because, in addition to having the broad paws and the cushioning effect that is superior to the hooves, it also has a long, flexible spine, which a sheep does not have. A sheep has a relatively rigid spine, which makes sense in terms of a hoofed, body design. But the cat does that leap effortlessly and claims its prey. So that's the main thing that we watch, is that by getting above the sheep, the leopard has created a parkour course and allowed its greater stability to prevail over the greater locomotory efficiency of the prey.
And how does that differ to other cats? I know you've got cats in your garden there that are attacking rats, and you enjoy watching that through the window. And I'm also thinking of leopards a lot. I was in the Kruger Park a couple of weeks ago and had leopards walking down the road right next to the car. And I noted, how much thinner the tail of the leopard in the Kruger Park is compared to the snow leopard. And so it's not only length, but also thickness of the tail. It seems to be a much heavier tail, but just on a cursory glance of looking at the two animals. When one thinks of a leopard in the Kruger Park, you do think of the ambush, the leopard jumping out the tree and, jumping onto the antelope or the human. There are many, many cases of leopards killing humans in the Kruger National Park by the unwary human having a smoke break in the evening under a tree and a leopard leaping out of the tree and killing the human. I'm wondering whether that human catching by leopards is out of the tree is also takes place with antelope, or is it or does a leopard need to stalk prey in the Kruger Park as much as the snow leopard had to stalk the sheep in the Himalayas?
Well, I think there's two differences, one in the biology of the cat involved and one in the environment. The easier one to describe is the difference in the environment, because the Kruger Park is a densely vegetated place where a typical Felid strategy of essentially sit and wait and then pounce works beautifully well, because you can easily stalk up quite close to an impala in that thick bush. And it is a reality. It's not just one of these naturalist legends that leopards actually do hunt by sitting in trees and waiting for animals to come under the tree. It's been filmed. Yeah. It's available on video. It does that. It doesn't usually fall out of the tree like a stone. It usually comes down via the bole of the tree, nominally speaking. But it does actually use gravity to land on the back of the animal and kill it. And that's, if you like, the ideal, or shall we say, the purest form of expression of, the ideal hunting strategy of a cat. So in many ways, the leopard is more truly cat-like than the snow leopard, because it's operating in an environment where you can actually be a cat to enormous effect. The snow leopard has no opportunity to do that, really, because even though there are rocks and ridges and so forth, it's a very open environment. It's essentially a high-altitude desert. And noisy as well, because the tectonic uplift in the Himalayas means that there's fresh rocks still shifting under gravity all over the place. There's screes and moving dust, and it's a very noisy environment for an animal like a sheep, which can hear much better than we can. So it's difficult actually to walk soundlessly over that shingly sort of landscape. So there's very little chance that a snow leopard will either sit in a particular place and find a red sheep happening to wander in front of it, because this population sparsity of the red sheep means that the probabilities are very low. So it can't really sit and wait purely. And it also can't fall out of a tree or hide behind a bush, because there's nothing like that going on. It can use the topography to some degree, but that's only going to get it within maybe 50 yards of its prey. So that's why it needs this poorly documented strategy, or this hypothetical strategy that we've been talking about, where perhaps systematically it always chooses an above position in order to charge downhill onto its prey. Now, coming to the tail of the snow leopard is interesting, because not only does it give the animal tremendous stability in an unstable environment, but it's also very furry, because it's part of the thermoregulation of the animal. Presumably, snow leopards wrap themselves with their tails when they sleep. But it has a particularly bushy tip, which is interesting in terms of signaling. Now, one of the fascinating things about cats is that they're generally well camouflaged, but they have surprisingly conspicuous tails when they want them to be so. And with a leopard, if you just scroll through Google Images and look at 24 pictures of leopards, you'll very quickly spot one in which the leopard is putting its tail up like a flag. Not only raising it high so that it can be seen easily by everyone watching it, whether other leopards or prey, but also it exposes a gleaming white undersurface to the part of the tail near the tip. So the leopard is normally very well camouflaged, but under some circumstances which have yet to be fully understood, it announces itself as unambiguously as if it holds a white flag up. And we don't know whether that's purely a social signal for a very territorial and antisocial animal, Or it's also a kind of an appeasement, because a leopard will sneak up on a group of impalas, but when it's been spotted and the impalas are fully aware of it, often what happens is the leopard will stand up as if to say, I wasn't doing anything anyway. And then it'll walk off with its tail high as if to say, don't get too riled, guys, because I wasn't really stalking you. Here I am. I'm in the open, and which may have some kind of effect in reassuring prey and maintaining that lack of panic. It's difficult to understand because it's paradoxical that an animal as superbly camouflaged as a leopard has such a striking caudal flag. The best way to describe it is as a caudal flag, because caudal refers to tail. Now, in the case of the snow leopard, there's also a very interesting caudal flag. And in some footages of the snow leopard, you'll notice that the people far away with their spotting scopes, tourists and guides looking for the snow leopard, will only spot it because of the caudal flag. They will see that telltale gleaming of the white, fluffy tip of the tail that gives away the animal when it's not hunting. Now, in this particular sequence, you don't see that because throughout this stalking sequence, this particular snow leopard keeps its tail down with the white, fluffy subterminal fur hidden. But if you look in other photographs and other videos, you'll very quickly spot situations where the snow leopard curls the tip of the tail back to show a gleaming white flag. What it never does is to raise the tail high like a leopard, but it's the same thing in principle, and that raises the question, well, what is the snow leopard doing that for? Because it lives in very sparse populations. Who is it signaling to when it walks around in the open with its tail gleaming like a white beacon, as it were, in contradistinction to this even more superb camouflage? I mean, the way the snow leopard is camouflaged in an open environment, just barren rocks, is truly stupendous. And
so it shows its tail flag even if walking alone, because I would have thought that it must use that flag to keep its mate or its cubs in tow and keep a companion close. But I can't understand how it, or why it would ever want to flag to prey or any other animal.
Well, the circumstance in which it might want to flag to prey is just simply in reassurance after a failed hunt.
But but why would a leopard want to reassure its prey? I mean, why does it even care what the prey's approach is?
Well, the psychology would run something like this: that in many parts of the habitat of the leopard, there are baboons, for example, and they make a hell of a ruckus when they spot a leopard. Now, presumably, when a baboon or an impala spots a leopard that's hunting, crouching and so on, that's more alarming than seeing it just walking off with its tail high.
Yeah.
And so there's a kind of a psychological play going on where a leopard parading out in the open with its tail high is almost like saying, look, I am here and I'm a threatening animal and you're going to bark and get, distraught at my appearance, but at least you can see that I'm not trying to hunt you. Now, but coming to the social aspect, the snow leopard lives at extremely low population densities. As you say, when a snow leopard walks around, it's most unlikely to be in the view of another snow leopard. And yet, if you watch a documentary made in Western Mongolia, which is well worth checking out, you'll see quite often that we have footage of the snow leopard walking around in the open and showing its tail in the form of the caudal flag. I don't know why it does that, but presumably it's signaling to other members of the same species rather than to prey. And presumably it's a way of saying that if there are other members of my species in view, they're going to see me because that's important. It's as important as scent marking. It may be important in male and female getting together in the mating season. In fact, within the same documentary in Western Mongolia, we see a beautiful sequence in which a mother snow leopard, who is still taking care of her juveniles and is therefore not receptive to mating, even though it is the mating season, is visited by a male. And we see how the male perceives that he's not welcome and therefore avoids making eye contact. But both of them, the female who approaches the male menacingly and indicating that he's not welcome, and the male who sort of walks to the side and eventually walks off. They're both showing their caudal flag in an obvious way, as if to say, I'm in display mode. I'm showing you that I'm a snow leopard, and we are engaging in some kind of social discourse, even though we're not vocalizing much, even though we're not making eye contact, even though there's not much overt aggression. We are in this mode where, as cat to cat, we can show our tail.
Right.
So it's poorly understood, and it's it's an unfortunate thing that, with all the research that's gone on into big cats, they're in some ways an overstudied group of animals. But there's almost no literature on caudal flags in any cat.
Okay.
You could probably write a book about caudal flags in cats, including the lion. For example, another fascinating tidbit is the jaguar can almost be simply described as the American form of the leopard in many ways. But the jaguar has absolutely no caudal flag whatsoever, whereas the leopard has a very clear caudal flag. Look up pictures, and you'll very quickly see that.
Yeah.
So what is it about that? Yeah.
Sorry, the baboon and impala piece. I still don't follow why a leopard would care whether the baboons or the impala know that the leopard is there. What's the psychology? Why is it advantageous for the leopard to tell the impalas, calm down, I'm not hunting you? I don't get that.
Well, I think part of it is the mobbing phenomenon. So we know that many different predators tend to be mobbed, for want of a better word, by animals that are broadly in the category of prey. A snake tends to attract a mixed group of birds that chitter and chatter and expose it. In India, there's wonderful footage in places in India where a tiger spotted deer, axis, and sambar. These deer are very different from antelopes because these loud, strident calls that are somewhere between a bark and a scream. And there's the langur in the same habitat in India, which also barks a bit like a baboon. And this sets up a hell of a ruckus, which must be very disturbing for a big cat, because the whole life of a big cat is about secrecy. And in the case of a leopard, for example, it's not just secrecy from prey that is its stock in trade. It's not just that the leopard needs to be moving around in the shadowy world where the prey doesn't really know where it is. That is important. But for a leopard, it's equally important for lions and hyenas not to know where it is. So by baboons shouting at a leopard, the main nervousness that the leopard gets out of that is, bugger it. All the hyenas and all the lions know that there's something going on here, and I don't want that, because a leopard is vulnerable to both the spotted hyena and the lion. It doesn't want to take that risk.
So the flag is saying, stop mobbing me. You're wasting your time and your energy.
It's basically saying, yes, it's like almost in a loose way analogous to a white flag in humans. It's saying, I give up. It's saying, I give up. Don't get excited, guys. Don't get excited. Don't embarrass me. Don't embarrass me, guys. I wasn't really hunting you, or if I was, I failed. Get over it. Go back. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. I'm out in the open.
Okay. Well, that's great. So, how does this all compare with what the cats outside your window are doing?
Well, the question of how this applies to small cats is a fascinating subject. And, the domestic cat, or the feral cat, or the wild cat from which the domestic cat is derived does not have a caudal flag. I'm not aware of any caudal flag in that lineage of cats. But again, the only analogy I can draw is that just as a snow leopard is not simply a sit and wait and then pounce killer, so your domestic moggy in your garden is not just a sit and wait pounce killer of rats, for example, because a brown rat, Rattus norvegicus, that is well grown and healthy is not nearly as big as a cat, but it's big enough to be quite intimidating. And when the average sewer rat spots a stalking cat, it doesn't just scurry off. It stands its ground, faces the cat, and opens its mouth, exposing the incisors in an intimidating gesture. This is something many people don't know about rats because we seldom corner rats in our urban life.
Yeah.
And in those circumstances, the cat, although it might be a male cat of, say, 4 kilograms versus a Rattus norvegicus of much less than a kilogram, it doesn't just rush in there because there's a genuine risk of injury. And as you know, most predators suffer from injury not so much in terms of just physical lesion. They suffer in terms of infection risk. So no cat wants to be bitten by a rat. And so the attack, the way attacks have been described is that the cat will typically follow the rat on the chance that the rat is somewhat cornered. And then the way it approaches the rat is to swat it or slap it with the paw forcefully, a bit like a secretary bird hits a snake, just simply to stun it, wear it out, and debilitate it in a gradual way. Because when a cat slaps a rat that's in retreat mode, it runs very little risk of being bitten. And eventually the rat is confused, subdued, and dulled to the point where the cat can get in and do what it really wants to do, which is to put its canine teeth on the nape of the neck and sever the spine by twisting the jaws. So again, the point I'm trying to make is that even your moggy hunting your rat in your backyard is not as simple in terms of just sit and wait and pounce as one might idealize in the distinction between sit and wait and pounce predators like felids and cursorial pursuit predators like canids or dogs.
Yeah. Is there also an analogy here in that there's a knife edge on which these cats are operating? So the knife edge for the snow leopard is running down that almost vertical cliff is extremely dangerous. And so it really is risking death. One slip of the foot and it, no matter how stable it is and how wide its paws are, it can also die falling, chasing the sheep down the cliff. And similarly, that cat is risking death at from the bite of a rat that will infect it. Would you agree that there's this knife edge element to it? And do the red sheep have anything else up their sleeves to make it more dangerous for the snow leopard? I wonder if they wouldn't try and find certain routes that down the mountain that they're going to be better at navigating than the leopard if such angles or rockiness exist. And then a leopard pouncing out of a tree in the Kruger National Park, where's the knife edge there? I suppose there's a danger in the horns of the impala, or is it a bit easier for a leopard than the tabby cat against the rat or the snow leopard chasing down the red sheep?
Well, there's a whole delicious complex of topics in there that have been underplayed because your questions are very much to the point about how felids operate. So let's try and just pick on a few of them. I'll make a mental note to revisit the question of horns, hooves, and fighting in a minute. But in general, all of these kinds of mountain specialized ruminants, bighorn sheep, Rocky Mountain goat, wild goat, ibex, wild sheep, and others, chamois, goral. There's a whole constellation of ruminants that have specialized on either cliffs or steep slopes, rocky slopes, as not only general habitat, but more particularly refuge. All of these animals ideally want to get onto a steep, rocky slope when a predator arrives. That's their ideal mode. So the moment that any predator arrives,
it, I assume.
Well, it implies above it, but it doesn't have to be above it, because imagine a snow leopard approaching a group of red sheep on their level. If the red sheep had a way of going around a corner and getting onto a cliff, they'd be almost completely safe, because Have you seen that? I know that you have. You know, that absolutely amazing footage of an alpine ibex somewhere in Europe, I think possibly in Switzerland, walking delicately on an almost vertical dam wall.
Yes.
To try and
Famous
get a little
footage.
bit of salt, you know,
Yes.
just a little bit of salt for its metabolism, and doing impossible balancing on the tiniest footholds on what seems to you and me like a wall that even a professional rock climber would not try to scale. Well, in that situation, because the hooves are so exquisitely designed, the ibex or the other rock rupicolous ruminant has a distinct advantage over the cat, and so that's the most elegant and efficient and final tactic for these rupicolous ruminants, is to get onto a cliff, shows over, because the cat has no advantage in speed, and it has a distinct disadvantage in terms of stability, because it doesn't have that finely tuned point that can get a toehold on tiny little irregularities. A snow leopard is no good at climbing cliffs, either upwards or downwards. Okay. And the most spectacular example of this particular strategy is the Rocky Mountain goat in the northwestern parts of America, which basically never flees. It's a very confident animal. It's prepared to use its horns against predators. It's very conspicuous, white all through the year, even though it doesn't live really in snow. And its whole strategy is just walk over to the nearest cliff, get high enough that the wolf can't get it, and then just wait. That's it. They're phlegmatic, confident animals because they're always around a cliff and they're always within walking distance. It's hard to get a Rocky Mountain goat even to run. It just makes sure that it can always get to a cliff, and it's aggressive enough with its horns, and its horns are purpose designed enough, being hook-like, that it can actually keep the animal at bay until it gets onto the cliff, and then the show's over. So the only way that a wolf or a puma can get a Rocky Mountain goat is by surprise, which is unlikely. Now, when it
why
comes
is it unlikely? Oh, because of the open terrain and perhaps the noise that it makes on the scree, etc.
Well, yes, and also that the Rocky Mountain goat is gregarious. It lives in an open environment, so it's hard to surprise.
Okay.
It wouldn't be gleaming white all through the year if it was an animal that was worried about something surprising.
Being stalked. Yeah.
Okay. We don't fully know why it's white all through the year, but it's definitely not niviculous. It's not white like a hare is white in the winter. It's not trying to hide in the snow. If you go through the thousands and thousands of photos of the Rocky Mountain goat, you'll be hard put to find one in snow. They don't really live in snow. They sometimes cross patches of snow, but they don't look very camouflaged even in snow. Anyway,
it's a giant flag.
Well, yes, again, it's not completely understood why the Rocky Mountain goat has chosen to be a giant flag, but it correlated in some way with the fact that it's not only cliff dependent. Its whole strategy is get on a cliff, because once it's on a cliff, there's no predator that can really match that. A puma is better at going up a cliff than a wolf, but a puma is no match for a Rocky Mountain goat on a cliff. And secondly, the Rocky Mountain goat is unusual among these rock-loving, steep country-loving ruminants in that it's one of the few ruminants that's really prepared to use its horns on a predator.
Okay.
And so it's an animal to be feared. If you're, sometimes hikers in places like Alaska or the northwestern part of the United States get approached on a scree by a male Rocky Mountain goat.
Yeah.
And in that case, it's a fair idea to get pretty scared at that time, because if that animal comes for you, you are in trouble. But coming back to the snow leopard does not really have any prey in any part of its environment, all the way from Western Mongolia through to Afghanistan, that can really defend itself, as far as I know. All of those prey species are timid, and even though the red sheep, which is actually Ovis viney, otherwise known as a subspecies of the Urial, even though that sheep can get to 90 kilograms in a fully mature male and has really impressive horns, a bit like a bighorn sheep, I don't know of any case recorded ever by a biologist in which a wild sheep, even a fully mature male, even attempted to use its horns on a predator. So Yeah, so that's off the table. Whether these sheep could defend themselves with their hooves or not, I don't know. But basically, what applies to a Rocky Mountain goat does not apply to wild sheep. Their
So
only strategy, yeah.
So the knife edge theme, that this animals operating on a knife edge, is not because of when it's trying to hunt the red sheep. It's not because there's some danger in the horns, but would you agree it's still a knife edge when it comes to running down a mountain slope? Or am I over dramatizing the danger for the snow leopard in that video?
No, I think you've nailed it. I think it's a very interesting exercise, and it's probably never been done before, to think of all the different big cats and then think of what their particular knife edge is.
Okay.
And I haven't done that yet, but I can start the process. Now, in the case of the snow leopard, I think you're right. I think the knife edge for a snow leopard is charging downhill, which tends to give it an advantage because of its greater stability. But that does not mean that it's risk-free. It just means that the risk is calculated to be greater for the sheep than for the leopard. In the case of the cheetah has no real downside to sprinting on the flats after a group of gazelles. It has a difficulty because the gazelle's tactic is to jinx and dodge, which it can do more effectively than its pursuer. But there's no part of that pursuit that's going to really break anything in the cheetah's body. The cheetah's knife edge is the fact that the moment it makes a kill, there are both the lion and the spotted hyena in the environment that are likely to show up before it eats its fill. That is its knife edge. So it's always trying to hunt somewhere away from the nearest group of a dominant predator, always trying to eat as quickly as possible. That's its knife edge. And in fact, that's one of its limiting factors, because the population densities of cheetahs everywhere tend to be limited by the associated population densities of both the lion and the spotted hyena. When it comes to something like a jaguar, I haven't even thought what its knife edge would be, but I suspect that it has something to do with water, because jaguars are different from leopards and most other big cats in being remarkably, I wouldn't call them amphibious, but they're remarkably happy to hunt in water. And they tackle caimans and turtles and other swimming animals. And I suspect that sometimes they get into grief, because ultimately they are a mammal that needs to breathe. And if you don't play it right, you can come to grief in that aqueous environment, even though the jaguar is very comfortable in water and will actually stalk a caiman on an island through the water.
I would have thought that perhaps, like the cheetah has the lion and hyena problem, the jaguar could have the large caiman and large anaconda problem.
Possibly, yes. But then you have to distinguish between those animals hunting it and it hunting them, but coming to grief in their environment. I haven't really thought it through, and perhaps there's not enough information on it. It would be interesting to examine this. I don't know what you'd call it, but what did you call it? The knife edge problem. The knife edge problem in terms of the puma, the cougar, for the lion, for the clouded leopard, and others. I think it would make a fascinating exercise, because all of them do have this risk factor going. And the interesting thing biologically is that it's not the same risk factor. In some ways, a cheetah and a snow leopard are comparable, because they're actually both hunting fleet-footed prey in an open environment. The ancestor of the domestic sheep in the form of this particular sheep that we see in this video, it's actually more antelope-like than livestock-like. It's got pretty long legs and it's a pretty fast runner. I think that in the open, a red sheep would be able to give any cat a run for its money, which makes it somewhat analogous with a gazelle being chased by a cheetah. But the situation is different in that there's no stability problem for the cheetah that's going to break its body. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And a leopard in the Kruger Park is an obvious knife edge. I suppose a bushbuck can be pretty dangerous, use its horns pretty effectively, but probably not an impala. If a leopard is jumping out of a tree to catch an impala, is there much risk? It's probably the lion danger again, or...
As a rough guess, again, I haven't thought it through completely, but as a rough guess, I would say that the knife edge for a leopard in the Kruger Park is threefold. It's the spotted hyena, which is just begging to kill it. There's no love lost. Any time that spotted hyenas, and there are usually several of them, can corner and kill a leopard, that's going to happen. There's no mercy there. Same with the lion. The lion obviously loves to kill the leopard, will always do so when it can. And so it just needs to find it in a compromising situation. Usually the leopard gets away because it can climb better. But sometimes, you can surprise it. But the third one, which is the most interesting conceptually, is the baboon. Baboons are very interesting in their dynamic with leopards because they don't seem to defend themselves from the leopard in the sense of a fair fight. It's a complicated relationship. Well, certainly the Chakma baboon in the Kruger Park does not do what most people think it does or should do in a moral universe, which is for the big male, which has canine teeth, even more formidable than the canine teeth of a leopard, to defend the weak and the female and the young in its group. It doesn't really do that. Sometimes a little, but not much. Usually the males are out for themselves and so on. But when a leopard is on the back foot, then a group of the Chakma baboon will go for it. And under those circumstances, they will tear it apart. The canines of a male baboon are a terrible thing because they're not just a puncturing device like the canines of a leopard. They are a ripping and slicing device because what the baboon does is it uses the sharp posterior edge of these rather blade-like canines in concert with an ability to grab, and it rips the animal apart by pushing it away while simultaneously pulling towards itself with its slicing teeth. So I fear the canines of a baboon much more than I fear the canines of a leopard, although, if you bring the claws of a leopard into it, the balance is restored. But what I'm trying to make is that I think what terrifies a leopard in the Kruger Park is as much male baboons as either spotted hyena or the lion. So it's got those three adversaries.
All three of those animals will come running if they know that there's a leopard that's just jumped out of a tree to catch an impala.
No, I would not say that the Chakma baboon will come running. No, I wouldn't go that far. I would say that the spotted hyena and the lion will definitely come running.
Yeah.
Running, yeah. But with the baboon, they'll just set up a huge ruckus.
Yeah.
And
that's dangerous as well for them.
Yeah, they'll only attack the leopard if they get it on the back foot, like, for example, if it's injured or cornered. They're not. You see, the dynamic is a little different because the essential animosity between the carnivores is one of competition.
Yeah.
Spotted hyenas hate leopards, it seems, mainly because they're in the same guild and they compete. Baboons don't compete with leopards. They're just potential prey of the leopard. And so they're not looking for a fight. But if they get a chance to get their own back, they'll get a bit of revenge.
The lion and the hyena, would they eat some of the leopard?
That is a fascinating question. I mean, again, there's not that much data out there, and such as the data are available, it's kind of ambivalent. In general, I would say that when one predator kills another, and this is very common among all the carnivora, it's also true of, for example, the wolf versus the coyote. The wolf loves to kill the coyote. I'm not sure if it applies to the African hunting dog with jackals. I'm not sure about that. We don't have the observations. But in general, they don't eat them. In general, it seems like the distaste of the flesh of a carnivore seems to put off even its murderer. But I wouldn't think that that's an iron rule. I think there are cases where there would be some consumption, but it's a reluctant consumption. The main prize seems to be in just murdering the competing animal. There's so much
surprising because the hyena's got this reputation of eating pretty much anything. So it boggles the mind that a hyena would go to the effort of killing a leopard and then just leave it, given that one has the sense that a hyena is going to eat pretty much any rotting meat even. And particularly the liver, the liver is going to be full of nutrients. And but you and I both think that nutrient deficiency in many environments plays a major role in shaping how animals behave. And I would have thought a hyena would just go straight for a leopard's liver for the nutrient value. And
well, you make a very good
taste.
point. You make a very good point, and you raise a very good search image for research. So I'm left simply guessing, and I'm probably wrong, but my guess would be this: that if a group of the spotted hyena, say 3 or 4 of them, manage to kill a leopard by getting it when it's not in a tree, then probably what will happen is this: they will not do what they do with prey, which is to instantly rip it apart in a feeding frenzy, in the way that they do with an impala, because the way the spotted hyena eats is to basically to tug against each other and to dismember and consume the animal as quickly as possible in a semi-cooperative and semi-competitive fashion. I think what they would do is they would leave the carcass and then they would return sometime later, maybe hours or days later, and then eat it. That is what I figure they would. I don't think they would spare the opportunity. I don't think they would pass the opportunity. But I can't somehow, I don't know if there's any observations, but I can't somehow envisage the spotted hyena murdering the leopard and then eating it as if it's prey in the same immediacy and relish that we see it eating an impala. Maybe. If so, that would be a very interesting thing to know. But I don't get that impression. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, sure. Just 2 observations, and I realize we're leaving the Himalayas and the snow leopards far behind, and perhaps we can come back to them to wrap up in a couple of minutes or so. But I had a wonderful game drive in Kazuko Game Reserve about 6 months ago, where the guide Memory, who was a Zulu gentleman, told me that we were discussing this point about what part of the animal do the predators eat first, and he pointed out that when he was a boy growing up in rural KwaZulu-Natal, that when the boys killed an animal, whether it was a livestock or a wild animal like a bushbuck, they would cut it open and eat the raw liver. That's what they went for. And with, they would often leave the rest of the animal. It was the liver that they all wanted to eat, and they would do it immediately with a lot of relish. I found that fascinating, and of course, we would come up with hypotheses as to why they were doing that, and which nutrients were particularly important for them. But it could be a wide range of things: copper, zinc, vitamin B12, etc. So I thought I'd just share that with you. And then yesterday morning, different observation entirely. I came off the mountain here in Cape Town and was driving back to my house here in Takai, and stopped the car because there was an enormous troop of baboons walking down the road. And I always enjoy watching them. It's the resident baboon troop here on the mountain, and I think you and I have seen them before together. The troop seems to have grown over the years, and full of babies, juveniles. I would have guessed well over 100, 150 animals. And most of them were walking on the road. And what was amusing and interesting is that there was a group of cyclists behind the troop, 20, 30 cyclists in a tight group. And they cycled straight through this troop, passing enormous male baboons within a foot. And not only the cyclists, but then there were a whole lot of pedestrians, people walking to work, women, men walking within inches of these enormous male baboons. And that was also fascinating to me, especially given your description of how dangerous these baboons can be for leopards and other animals. And here, humans and baboons are living amongst one another with both species being apparently blissfully unaware of the extreme danger. The human can kill the baboon with a weapon. And certainly those male baboons could kill any of those humans in a heartbeat. So, yeah, two separate observations I thought you'd find of interest.
Well, yeah, having a little bit of experience of the chacma baboon on the Cape Peninsula myself, I find that fascinating that not only has this species survived in suburbia, in the southern suburbs, but it seems to be burgeoning. It seems to be increasing. And it seems to be even more accepted by the people who are the workers who are walking past it, were they sort of middle class people?
Yes, they were walking to an office job. It looked like to me there are a lot of sandpark offices around, and they were just on their way to work. And then, strangely enough, just another layer to this observation is that there are 4 or 5 people who have jobs keeping the baboons away from houses, and they've got paintball guns, and so they were herding the troop up the mountain, keeping them away from the houses. So there are humans, threatening the baboons, herding them, and then there are other humans just walking in amongst them.
Well, I think this evolving dynamic between the human species and the chacma baboon on the Cape Peninsula, mainly in the suburbs that you've described, but also in the Cape Point section of Table Mountain National Park, it's a fascinating thing that it deserves more documentation, because I'm not sure that I know of too many communities outside of India where humans are so tolerant of a large and potentially dangerous monkey. I mean, in India, of course, it's a different ethic completely, and monkeys are tolerated to a fault. Yeah. But in Africa, this isn't something that often happens. I mean, everybody knows that the traditional relationship between the chacma baboon and the Afrikaans farmer is one of bitter enmity, for good reasons. And the baboon in South Africa has a long history of being mercilessly exploited for the laboratory industry, for human testing. People have been catching baboons and torturing them for science and medicine for decades, and nobody seems to care to this day. So for Cape Townians who do suffer from baboons, because baboons have a peculiar proclivity to getting into your house. They seem to feel no insecurity when they get right inside your house through a window or whatever. It's a terrible thing to come home and to find baboon feces all over your kitchen, everything smashed and on the ground. So there's a legitimate basis for enmity, and yet somehow the chacma baboon in Cape Town seems, if anything, to be edging its way towards greater numbers and greater popularity, which I can't really explain. I mean, I think it's fascinating and interesting from a biological point of view, and a psychological point of view, but I'm not going to be able to shed much light on it.
Baboons are causing havoc in the Kruger National Park, where I was at a picnic site there a couple of weeks ago, where there's a full-time guard with a catapult trying to keep the baboons away from the picnickers, and it's just not working. These enormous male baboons are running into the picnic site and grabbing food off the table, with the humans still hanging on to the food sometimes. They're not harming the humans yet, but they're just helping themselves to these picnickers and their food. I remember you saying that you think it's probably going to end badly, this relationship between baboons and humans in the southern suburbs of Cape Town, because because of exactly this. They damage the houses, and it's just not compatible. They're ultimately not compatible. Similarly, at the picnic sites in the Kruger National Park, I just don't see it as being sustainable. Maybe that's the appropriate word. You can't have the tourists permanently terrorized by these baboons. People were nervous. There was shrieking and pandemonium happening all the time, and food being stolen and catapults being used. It was mayhem. And I did have this sense that Sandparks is going to have to step in at some point and fix the problem. And that means either translocating the baboons or I suppose exterminating them, which is an awful thought. But I think you thought the same was going to have to apply in the southern suburbs, that it just isn't sustainable to have a national park with baboons on the border of suburbia. Have your thoughts changed?
Well, I think I made that rather flawed prediction probably more than 15 years ago, and I think I have to admit that I was wrong at this point, because there's no sign of my prediction coming true. So this is why I would characterize this whole fascinating phenomenon. I would say that there's no puzzle on the side of the baboon. We don't have to wonder why the baboon is taking advantage of people, okay?
Yeah.
Although it's very interesting how they do it, and the fact that they target women rather than men and all sorts of fascinating things. But the real puzzle is, why are the humans putting up with it? That is a psychological as well as a biological question that I think is really worth pondering. For some reason, at least in South Africa today, there's a growing tolerance of the baboon as if it has some kind of human rights, which makes people reluctant to kill it and willing to go to considerable trouble and expense to try to how can we say, persuade it, work with it, nudge it, as it were. That would not happen in a society where there had not been some kind of psychological shift. Because, as I say, the deep psychological history of South Africans is not to love baboons at all.
Yeah.
I think if you went back to the 60s in South Africa, you wouldn't find a single person, including most biologists, who had any time for baboons at all. They would shoot them without compunction if the baboon was a nuisance, particularly a large male, a threatening large male. So something's shifted in the psychology, and I can't say whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I can't really say that it's aligned with a conservation ethic necessarily, because there's always a downside to everything.
Yeah.
But it's almost, there's almost like a parallel. Here I may be stretching the analogy to breaking point, but it's almost like the increasing tendency for political correctness among humans has somehow extended to large primates in certain parts of the world. It'll be interesting to look at Gibraltar, for example, where there's a much more generally known coexistence between the Barbary macaque and humans. And I'm not sure how intimate that association is or how much of a problem it is and so on. But there are a few places in the world, mainly in India, though, where there's tremendous coexistence between large cercopithecid primates and humans. But the only places I'm aware of where that coexistence carries on is where there's a religious value attributed to the monkey, as in India. Hindus are prepared to put up with all kinds of nonsense from macaques, because they, as they do with many other species of wildlife, they attribute spiritual or religious value to them. That's not the case in South Africa. Nobody's saying spare the chakma baboons in the Kruger Park or in the southern suburbs of Cape Town because they have some kind of symbolic spiritual or religious significance. That's not a part of it at all. There's something else going on, which I don't understand, but I think it's worth looking at.
No, absolutely. And it's costing residents, the city of Cape Town, many millions of rands a year, many millions, to keep these 4 or 5 guards on patrol with their paintball guns. And the contract almost came to an end this year. And there was a big outcry and discussion in the local newspapers about it. But at one point, it really seemed like these baboons were going to be let loose, as it were, without anyone controlling them. And I was puzzled as to how this was going to play out, because then you've got 100, 150 baboons just running amok amongst suburbia. I think it would have been an absolute disaster. And fortunately, the city found the extra money to keep it going. But it seems like it's every year this decision is being revisited. And so I don't know whether the city is going to be able to find the millions every year. And it's going to be an interesting experiment to see what happens and how society treats those baboons when there are no paintball gun herders, making sure that they're not in suburbia all the time. We should also briefly mention, and maybe we need to come back to the topic once you've looked at the video, but I found that video that the Begs was made in Nyasa in Mozambique, where the local communities have religious ceremonies with baboons, and the baboons are tame and sit with the humans in a circle. The adult baboons sit with the humans, playing out the religious ceremony. They're getting fed, and so they're much like a dog learns to sit when it's getting fed. I think the baboons are doing the same, but it's remarkable. And the juveniles are playing around the adults, and everyone seems to tolerate them fooling around and not sitting in the circle. But there's another example of baboons becoming tame around humans. So we've drifted away from snow leopards, but you want to say something else about baboons?
Well, I just think that there's several podcasts in this. I think that you and I can look forward to chatting about baboons in greater depth on a number of fronts.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's another podcast that listeners will, I'm sure, find interesting that we need to hold down the line, and that is about bees. You won't know that I'm currently having bee immunotherapy because last time I was stung by a bee, I had a terrible reaction, and my throat started swelling up, and my face developed a rash. Well, my whole body developed a rash, and so there was a danger that I would go into an anaphylactic shock. And you can fix this problem by having an injection every month with bee venom, and then over a couple of years, your allergy disappears. The immune system changes so that you don't respond. But I heard yesterday that anecdotally, bees respond very differently to those who are allergic to bees versus those who are not allergic. And it seems that people who are allergic get stung much more. And then when you're on the immunotherapy and your allergy decreases, then you stop being stung. And there's a theory, the professor who worked on this immunology at the University of Cape Town for decades has a theory that it's related to antibodies or proteins that people who are allergic have in their blood, and perhaps translated into some scent, that pheromone or some such chemical that the bees can detect. And the theory being that bees are wanting to keep people at bay who have been stung more than people who have not been stung. Because if you've been stung before, then you are potentially a human who's after honey. And so it made sense to me from an evolutionary perspective that humans and bees, having evolved together over millions of years, if we go back to Australopithecus, bees would target those humans that are the honey gatherers, and they end up picking up which are the honey gatherers by smelling the immune response to being stung, which is just a fascinating hypothesis. And then furthermore, the person who gave me the injection yesterday said that she's had 300 patients go through this lab over the last 10 years, and she noted that one of the people she had treated had a experience where someone was managing the bees. It was a beekeeping operation, and the gardener in this beekeeping estate had shaken the hive by mistake, and the bees had got very agitated. And again, this is just anecdotal, but interesting to perhaps research and think through. The gardener, from the bees got very agitated, and he had to run away. From that moment onwards, whenever the gardener entered the property, the bees became agitated. Other people enter the property, not agitated. But this gardener enters the property, highly agitated bees. This is N equals 1. It's anecdotal, but wow, isn't that an interesting thing to think through? The nurse who gave me the injection said it seemed like the bees are able to smell individuals, much like a dog can smell an individual and knows who its owner is, can detect the clothing of its owner, for example. And so maybe bees are able to also smell individuals. So I thought I would leave you with that tantalizing thought.
Well, there's hardly a more fascinating thought that you could leave us with. It's such an eye opener, and we have to be humble as biologists and realize that there's so much that we haven't even thought of, let alone understand, even in insects. So, my mind, for one, is open to all kinds of possibilities. And it makes sense that African bees in particular, which have this long history of antagonism with humans, would have all kinds of interesting predator-prey dynamics going on, So wonderful, and I look forward to more research on that. But as you say, we have come on a long conceptual circuit stimulated by our lovely video on the snow leopard, and
Yes.
We recommend to viewers, please watch this video. It's the link is given below, and bear in mind all of the different points we've made. We may be wrong, but at least it'll give you a conceptual framework to get more out of this already very dramatic and fascinating video clip. And until we join you again from exploring the BioEdge, like, subscribe, and show us to your friends. And we'll be back with more.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
All righty. See you next
time. All right. Cheers.
Cheers.